All right, we are on Nine Mind Radio. Before I get into the subject that is the origin of the Neanderthal race, I'm going to go over some things that I've observed and have a bit of a perspective on. I notice we're going into self-destruct mode, I notice again. It's perpetual. But before I go into that even, just want to give a good synopsis of what I've studied recently is Silent Weapons Required Wars. I've referred that to our people, black people, to read now. The document itself, gives you a little bit of a history of the document. The document itself was something that was created in the early 70s. And it was something that was found. When you get the document, you'll read this, but it was actually a document that was thrown out. It was on a typewriter, and it was thrown out in the CIA office. And it was found by a man. He remains nameless. He never put his name out there, but basically it was a document that was talking about how to control the human population. And it's a great document. It's only like 40 pages long. It's like it's book. It's like, half of a book. Usually books maybe 100-something pages. But it's 40 pages long, and it's very, very needed for blacks to read. One instance, I'm not going to tell the whole thing, but so far it goes into what's subject called shock treatment. Shock treatment is the method of a social experiment that they decided to create on how they were going to add more commercials. Commercials, in actuality, we get this idea. We'll say, well, commercials are programming. They're programming you to buy food and buy this, buy clothes, buy sneakers, Look at this movie, look at this TV. That's right in a sense. But the way they programmed it was, or the way they named it was that commercials are what was called shock treatment, that they could shock the brain with electric shock. It's like constantly sending radio waves to the brain to react to certain things that you'll see. Case in point, give you an example. If a person is sitting down, black man, Sunday afternoon, they're watching football, and you could be a proclaimed vegetarian or whatever, a non-drug user, but they'll constantly shock you with, beer commercials, constant beer commercial, constant beer commercial, constant beer commercial. And within the beer commercial, they're telling you the price of the beer. The price of the beer is X amount of price. They know who watches what. So when they look at what beer commercial they're going to put out, they know who to sell it to, even though if you look at most TV shows, this is a really good point to make, is that when you look at TV shows, you look at the commercials are geared towards specific demographics. When you see racial type commercials, most of the time, let's say you're looking at a show on, let's say, ESPN, you'll see commercials with mostly white men in it because these type of commercials, these type of channels are usually geared towards white men. But when you look at, let's say, for example, going back to the example, you're looking at a commercial that's selling cheap beer. They know black men don't have a lot of money, so let me shock this individual with X amount of, cheap beer this, Bud Light this, Budweiser that, Corona this, and Dos Equis this. It's cheap. So I can continue to keep pushing the same thing in your face repeatedly. These are shock treatments. It's like on a covert level, it's like that part in Clockwork Orange where the man's eyelids are like, open wide shut. He has to be programming him to be a better person, to not be as demented as he was in the movie. But I can get this person, as long as I keep showing this individual the same type of commercial repeatedly, I'm shocking the brain to do what I want it to do. And, for example, if I'm create, different shows as well, because not only is this based in commercials, but it's also based in the news, meaning that when you look at news, you're getting someone who's reporting to you exactly what they want you to know about that specific subject. This is not 100% of anything. It could be 10 to 15% of something. But this is still shock therapy. I can get you to see a specific individual a certain type of way because you've already programmed to see me as the provider for your information, to be informed on certain social affairs. So what I'll do is I'll continue to keep showing you the same propaganda repeatedly, because I need you to think about this the way I want you to think. So in reality, they didn't see news or just TV shows to be a certain type, because even in news, you're being shocked to see certain people a certain type of way. And the thing is, they know that the human brain works off of repetition. So if I can get you to see certain things a certain way repeatedly, or if I can show it to you just many times, I can get you to move however I want you to move. So this is what they decided to do, was to get to the point. They decided to make the human population, or the family within the structure, the cubicle that's been created, a social experiment to how they want things to be ran. And this was an experiment that was an idea from the Rockefeller family. This is documented. And what I want people to do, go online when this is over, look up Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Even if you're online right now, you're at your computer or whatever, look up Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. If you buy a printer or wherever, or you just read it from your phone, and you give a really good idea. Because at some point what I'll do next week as well, I'll actually go over some further information about it, and we also have a schematic for how they wanted the human family to move after the 70s. And it's this change within the human family, and it was specifically geared towards the black family. It began to really take shape in from the mid to late 70s, early 80s. Of course, when the black men was pushed out of the home, and the black family was just no longer a family, it was a single-parent home, which is an unnatural dichotomy for African people. So when you look at what's been going on to us, we have now become literally a social experiment for the white race, or mainly for the power elite, the Rockefellers, Rothschild, etc. But specifically in this case, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, dealing with the Rockefeller family. And this is something that they needed to do, because even with what came out recently from a man from Nicholas Rockefeller, who was David Rockefeller's son, he basically said that the feminist movement was a CIA covert operation, basically just to get more money from women, because there was a demographic, a racial or a human demographic that they wasn't getting money from. And they got the double whammy when they got black women to get involved in it, and they used the vulnerability and gullibleness of what was going on, and was able to control women to start, they fought for the right to work and fought for the same wages, but then they can tax that group higher now because of this movement that was a feminist movement. And, of course, Gloria Steinem, being CIA operative, she was part of that movement. It wasn't even about women's rights. Again, it was a CIA covert operation to get women, to become a part of a tax bracket so the Rockefellers can make more money off of the human population. And this is documented. There's others, black feminists, female feminists from, for example, the new Black Panther, the Black Panther Party from the 60s and 70s, from Elaine Brown, who her father was Boulay, and Angela Davis, who was a CIA operative. Both Elaine Brown and Angela Davis were CIA operatives. And that's a big wake-up call for a lot of our sisters because they look up to her, Angela Davis specifically, but she was CIA. Sorry. And this was, if you want to source, our brother, I'm trying to remember, don't quote me too much. I'm trying to make sure I get the brother's name right. He was one of the mentors of Tupac Shakur. I'm trying to remember. It wasn't Mutulu Shakur, but let me look this up right now while I'm right in front of the computer. I just want to make sure I get y'all get this right. Excuse me, y'all. Let's see. I'm looking it up for y'all right now. Let's see. Yeah, Angela Davis. Yeah, this is something that was actually known for quite a while. And I found it also I found it very, very funny that when they made a movie about Angela Davis about a year and a half ago, they put out that she was part of the Communist Party. The Communist Party was connected to CIA anyway. Most of those parties, just to give you a brief rundown, most of those parties was that you saw these organizations was CIA ran. They were already infiltrated and they ended up becoming agents. So all that is very necessary to know. Let's see here. I just wanted to get this to you. I won't take a little long, but I just want to get this information to you all. This is very important to know. Let's see here. It's funny because now it was a lot of the women, the leadership positions in the Black Panther Party. A lot of the women became CIA. It's also indicated that Erica Huggins was also CIA as well. Yeah, this is a good idea to know this. Very good idea to know this. Very good idea to know this. But yeah, this was from our brother Geronimo Pratt. Just want to give you a source. He was able to intercept certain calls from Erica Huggins, Elaine Brown, and Angela Davis to be CIA operatives that was within the Panthers. And as well, I know this is way off the subject, but Elaine Brown was one of the many people who was able to help take down our brother Huey P. Newton in the MK Ultra, MK Delta project. And this was also confirmed in FBI files. Moving on. Again, for those who didn't get the name, Geronimo Pratt. It's funny how now you look back, there was very few Panthers that was thorough, and very few sisters who was thorough, and this is truth. Assata Shakur was one of the few of our sisters who was thorough in that didn't go to the CIA, that didn't get either wasn't already an operative or get converted to being an operative. Sad, but that's reality. But I want to go, before I go into the origin of the Neanderthal white race, I want to get my take on certain things I'm seeing recently. Two things. One of them I'm actually involved in, which is kind of sad. Black Power Awards. I'm going to give my take on the situation. Personally, I felt the timing was, right now we're still fighting what we're going through, so it's kind of hard to really give a time frame for when they have a Black Power Awards. But I'm not gonna. My thing is to not make. I'm not gonna make no videos about anybody else's business about why they did what they did and why they went to an award show. I understand why people felt the need to say what they wanted to say, but I already made a post about it. I'm like, what business is that of anyone else's to criticize someone else for doing what they did? I think the flip side to the Black Power Wars was this that I noticed. They were giving awards because they were giving, how do I put this, authority figures. Like, let's say our brother Infudishi over ancient Kemet and spirituality. You realize black people for a long time, even after the emergence of Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark, and even my father, Dr. York, we still had white authorities in our minds in terms of education. So, we still look to world over. A lot of us still went beyond Dr. Ben and went to Gerald Massey for ancient Kemet information. And I think it was very telling of where we are now that we can say, look, we got black authorities. We don't need them. We can give these people awards to say, this is the person I'm gonna stand up in terms of information, in terms of authority over us as black people. You understand? It's very important to do because we've been living in this society for so long that most of our reactions and our education has been due in part to white people. So why not create some type of escape in order to, and I don't want to say escape because that could be perceived as me saying escaping white supremacy, but some type of show or whatever it is that you're able to give, some type of accolades to your own people. We don't do that very much. We operate for the most part as slaves. So we treat each other as slaves, less than, inhuman. So a lot of times when a person is doing a service for us, that's a free service. For the most part, our teachers didn't get paid. You got to realize Malcolm X died broke. His family didn't have anything when he died. Khalid Muhammad died broke. And we're not even thinking about these things even to this day. How is it that our people are able to die like this and we don't care about it? You understand? You understand? It's just crazy. And we don't take care of those who take care of us. So we're getting to the point where we have to start saying, okay, you're, for your services to our people, you deserve this. I think that was very good to do. From my perspective, I think that was a great thing to do. You can give, one of our elders, Mwamu Barudi, for the services that he's been doing for black people. Why not? Why treat your own people like slaves? Why treat your people? Why not give them some form of award for what they've done? They deserve that. You understand? It's like being in an organization of people, we become nameless individuals. We just do services because you're supposed to. Nobody's supposed to do anything. When a person stands up and begins teaching black people, he or she has to understand that something can happen to him or her. So why not say, I'm with you in this? Now, in terms of the whole award show thing, I don't know. In terms of how people felt about it, that's your business. You can feel the way you want to feel about it. But when it gets to the point where people are like threatening each other online on Facebook and people making videos being subliminal and calling names out, that's bullshit. Bottom line, it's bullshit. Because you're putting in the element of the street into something I thought we graduated from. But people, for some reason, in their minds, egotistically feel that they can control other people. Or you feel the need that you want to throw out the threat to this and the threat to that, which is really ridiculous because it's unnecessary to do. Totally unnecessary. It's totally unnecessary to treat your people that way. It's very unnecessary to do things like that to each other. But we do it habitually, and it gets old. It's very old right now to treat each other like that. And that's just it's really crazy. Now, moving on. The whole polite thing right now, man, I'm at the point where I'm like, look, please don't ask me about it. He is his own man. What he's done in terms of people's money, he has to account for that. If people really feel that bad about it, then what people should do as a collective is say we're not going to support this individual in terms of what he does, or we're going to approach him in what you think that, or, you know, if it's enough people who is asking for money that they say he didn't give them, then approach him about it. But nobody has a right to tell me or anybody else who I can or cannot talk to. First of all, me and Polite have not spoken in over a year in any form. So at the end of the day, what I choose to do is my business. What he chooses to do really is his business. If you continue to support him and what he does, then what does that say about you? If you're looking at the things that he does, if you see him take a picture with a white woman, but you're still looking at it, and now it's becoming a debate between, or a supposed debate between my brother, Ramesses, people call him Prince, and Polite, that's trying to be, you know, I'm like, come on. All this stuff is escapism. If you want to be totally honest about it, even going back to the Black Power Awards, you want to punch me in the face because I went to a Black Power Award. I didn't go, but I'm just saying, people talking like that. But you have no idea of what to do about white supremacy. These are things that the black mind goes through, and it's escapism away from actually trying to solve problems. You're not being very strategic in what you're doing, and you don't want to be told to be more strategic, so you just want to open your mouth, which is what we do continuously every single day. We don't want to strategize. All we want to do is talk about what we're doing, as opposed to actually getting to a consensus of how we're going to end this system of racism, white supremacy. You see perpetual deaths every single week or almost every other day. You scroll past it because now you're desensitized. But when it's time to actually act on it, you don't do anything but yell and scream online and create Facebook posts or Instagram posts, yelling and screaming into the camera and looking really stupid. So when it comes time to actually ending or trying to solve black people's problems or separating from white people, now all of a sudden people get quiet. I thought so. See, all that type of stuff we have to be able to move away from, or move away from people who are not actually trying to solve problems. Because there are people who are hanging around not trying to actually solve problems, but just want positions into the actual consensus of black people or over black people. And that has to stop because it's getting old. The up and down leadership of black people, that's dead because it hasn't worked. It's time to go back to ancient Africa and go back to circular positions where everyone had a position and nobody's more powerful than the other. But the problem is 90% of our attitudes and our actions is based on ego as black people. And because we don't want to let go of our ego, guess what? You're trapped in an egotistical world where you feel that you know more than the other person, so I can tell the other person what to do. That's why you get 1 million black organizations with nothing getting done. That's retarded. And we have to be able to rise above groups or put groups in their place who are not about changing anything. It's time, and we have to get to that point. Overstood? Yes. So now we're going to go into the origin of the Neanderthal or white race. I decided to do this because for at least 3 years, I put up a class on my YouTube channel, and it was Origin of the White Race. And it was crazy because it got so much hits, and I got so much hate for white people. And it was crazy. It was really funny to see them just lose their minds over a class, over a recording. And within the class, what I was teaching was from a website called, realhistory.com, when it was talking about the Dravidians who migrated out of Africa. And there was 3 groups of Africans within. One was Dravidian, another one was also Indian, and another one migrated and landed, or not landed, but stayed into parts of China or Japan. And the other Dravidians, the group of Dravidians, as well as the other Indians, they stayed into, of course, what's now known as India, and they would be what would be known as the East Indian albino, or East Indian, the Dravidian albino, and the Dravidian albino, 6,000 years ago, would be the origin of the Caucasian race. This is what was being taught on the video that I put together, the class I put together. This was about 3 years ago. And I also put some of the Yakub got the devil stuff in there and everything. And it was a greatly put class, but it wasn't based on historical or DNA evidence. And within my studies now, we have to use scientific method for what we teach to our children. We cannot continue to teach things to our children that we can't prove. Scientific method, part of it has to include DNA evidence, because also what's also being taught is that white people came out of an ice age, and within that ice age, Africans were caught in the ice age, and they lost their melanin, or they lost their melanin on purpose, which is something also taught. And within that situation, they depigmented and became albinos within a 10,000-year period or within a 1,000-year period. And for me, when I first heard this, the first time I heard this was in Hidden Colors 2. And it didn't make sense to me. Reason why is because if that is the case, you have groups of black people who live in extremely cold climates without the sun around them, but they never got lighter. Parts of Alaska, Antarctica, North and South Pole. These are indigenous black people who actually live over there. When I say indigenous, I mean they migrated out of Africa and have been living there, and no one else has made contact with them. And they've survived, but they have not gotten any lighter. You understand? Now, there's others that may live in that area, of course, Alaska and North and South Pole, other groups that went in there. But blacks, but those groups that went there, they came in there light. They did not get lighter, okay? The Africans that live out there, they did not get lighter. Now, I've heard people say, and this is really silly, they try to base some of what they're teaching in terms of cold climate makes you lighter based upon two things, that the higher you are above the equator, you're lighter, or lower above the equator, and the lack of vitamin D. First of all, melanin itself is not only equated with vitamin D, okay? You have magnesium, you have chlorophyll, iron, okay, and as well as vitamin D. But it's not only vitamin D. See, when we teach melanin, we're being taught melanin still from a European perspective, because what's also included in that argument of the Ice Age making white people is that they also teach that if you are too dark, that is a negative. They also teach that also in this, because this is European curriculum that teaches this, because the first African scholar that teaches was Sheikh Anta back in 1975, and he taught this. So, and a lot of people also get a lot of their information that are African scholars from a man named Michael Bradley when he made the Iceman's Inheritance book, and I read that book for my research, and a lot of it had a lot of flaws in it as well. Now, what it's also saying is that in their curriculum, that too much melanin, if you're too dark, because they only teach that melanin is only a component that is created in extremely hot climate. You're not born black, but you're burnt black. This is what Europeans teach. You understand what I'm saying? They don't teach that melanin is a natural gift that we get from our ancestors. They teach that is what? Something that we were burnt into. So that what they teach is that, again, that just say, for example, they made the example, and this is in cultural anthropology class, so I've done my research. that if you go into Lower Sudan, where there are extremely dark people, not just that, but also in Senegal, that these people, because they were in hot climates, but what's really funny is both these countries are not at the equator. They're extremely dark African people. They teach in cultural anthropology that these people were burnt black, and because they were in the sun too long, that this was a genetic deficiency. Too dark is a genetic deficiency. This is what cultural anthropology teaches. But it also teaches that white people came out of an ice age. It was just a climatology change that changed the complexion of the skin. But they don't go into the genetics, because this is have to damn near doing it in the melanin class, because melanin is not just something in the skin. It's something also in your body, in your organs, and in your hair. How does that account for sperm cell? Because they tried to teach that, okay, that when we turn white in the ice age, I have to even explain this whole process before I go to my research. This is crazy. That we change our hair, because our hair is naturally, kingly, non-ether hair, that our hair changed to protect the neck from the cold. Okay, if that's the case, then why didn't we ever evolve living in cold climates wherever we are on the planet? Because everywhere you go in cold climate, you still see black people. It's not like we ran away from the cold and went all up in the same sun. That stuff sounds like Disney crap. Okay? You're saying that the way we got to our situation is because as we were black first. It doesn't make any sense. We were black first, and we lost our hair. We went from the skin. Now we're in the hair. So we lost our natural hair. So we either, because the question was never answered, did we lose it on purpose, or was it a natural process? Our hair just thinned out. If that's the case, then why is it that Africans in again, extremely colder climates, their hair doesn't thin out? You know what I'm saying? What this is basically saying is that melanin is only an epidermis component, and it doesn't deal with genetics. Okay? Now, if you're going to teach this to your children, you better make sure you do your research, because all this goes into the same situation again. And also, when I talked about melanin is contained in sperm cell, why do you think that white people, since their inception, coming out of the caves, have always had a low sperm count? Why do you think that is? Is that inherited from African people? No, because we overpopulate the earth. If they are who they are based upon coming out of African people, they would have actually had genetic traits. Because notice, going into the Neanderthals are extremely sterile individuals. Extremely sterile. They had children, but they were extremely sterile. And notice the genetic relation to whites, because whites are very sterile as well. So you notice a lot of their children are born with Down syndrome and all types of deficiencies that we don't have ourselves until we mix in with them. So we end up inheriting their diseases as African people. So going into what I've learned in terms of the Neanderthals, because I had to literally get rid of that the whole class I had on my YouTube channel, because it wasn't based on facts. And it was clear that, I didn't do my due diligence, but it was time to do due diligence. And when I kept hearing this thing about the Neanderthal DNA within whites and Asians, is that, number one, that this comes from the Neanderthal Genome Project. I did my research. The Neanderthal Genome Project was done in May of 2010. For those that are listening, please write this down. May of 2010 was the Neanderthal Genome Project. And I'll also quote from my notes as well here, so you can actually get everything down. But that was a process of them doing a scientific method of DNA from Africans all throughout the continent, from different groups of Europeans and Asians. And what they came up with is that there's completely, totally different genetic differences between the Africans and the set of Europeans and Asians. The Europeans and Asians, or Eurasians all together, the Eurasians specifically first, are only 96% European, 96% human being. And the other 4% is Neanderthal animal, or whatever you want to call. Neanderthal would be, if you dealt with in terms of genus Homo to Homo erectus to Homo sapiens sapien, they would be Homo erectus. Okay? When you deal with the Asian is only 98% human being. The other 2% is Neanderthal. If you go back, at least, as they said, between 50 to 60,000 years, as they want to go back to a great migration out of Africa, again, there was no Neanderthals in Africa at all, because there is no real date for the African. You can't, for someone to give a date for how far we go back when you keep seeing different dates come up for African people from 100,000 with the Khoisan to going into the millions in parts of Kenya, and then, Lucy in terms of the million situation. There's no date for us. So watch out for people who only try to date us based on European calendars. But anyway, when you have when they try to teach about the Great Migration, it was a great migration out of Africa. But you have to realize within the parts of what's called Eurasia, the Neanderthals were already existing at that time. You understand? The Neanderthals were already existing there at that time. Whites never migrated out of Africa. How can you migrate, number one? This is used non-reasoning here. You cannot migrate out of a continent in an extremely hot climate when you can't stand the sun in your own area. You have to stay in the caves in order to survive. And let's take it to present day. Europeans to this day, white race, Neanderthals, can barely stand the sun in America. If you can't stand the sun in America, how in the world can you stand the sun in Africa? If you migrate out of Africa, if there were Neanderthals and there's no DNA evidence to prove so. Again, this is what I'm giving you is based upon DNA evidence. You can go online, research this yourself. There's several sites that prove this, and those sites, of course, when you deal with National Geographic, their information is actually coming from the Neanderthal Genome Project that, again, teaches, based upon DNA evidence, that the white race isn't even fully human. They are 96% human, the other 4% is Neanderthal. The Asians are only 98% human and 2% Neanderthal. And the African are only, the African within the continent are the only group that does not have Neanderthal DNA. We do now because of mixing through slavery and situations such as that. So he's in us, and we are in him. But that's the reality, is that we have to, going into the breeding process, we have to breed that beast out of us, because he and she are beasts by nature. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read from my notes just to give you a good background. It's from my Neanderthal notes. Africans migrated out of Africa around 60,000 years ago. Eurasians was already occupied by Neanderthals and another group called the Denisovans, and this is spelled Denisovans, Denisovans. As the Africans migrated through Eurasia, they encountered the Neanderthals and interbred. Because of the small amounts of Neanderthal DNA was introduced into our genes. Everyone living outside of Africa today has small amounts of Neanderthal DNA in them. A team of scientists comparing the full genomes of Neanderthals and Denisovans concluded that most Europeans and Asians have between 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. Indigenous sub-Saharan Africans have no Neanderthal DNA because their ancestors did not migrate to Eurasia. And the source for this, I'm going to give you my source, was the geographic.nationalgeographic.com. The next source, this is a May 2010 of the Neanderthal Genome Project. Modern Europeans have a minimum of 4% DNA from Neanderthals, which equals whites who are the descendants of the Cro-Magnons, which is a form of course, Homo erectus. And this is coming from the ape family. So their race is literally a race of beasts or of the ape family. East Asians have 2% Neanderthal DNA. The Oriental racial groups, and again, this is another group. This is something that my father was teaching in the non-ball series, that you deal with when you deal with the Europeans and the Asians. These are from the ape family, usually within the gibbon, which would be the Asians, and you had the chimpanzee, which would be the European. The Oriental racial groups. Black Africans have no DNA from Neanderthals. African blacks. It appears that Australians do not have any Neanderthal DNA either. This is further research. So they are also archaic Homo sapiens from Africa. Genetic evidence also suggests that Australian Aborigines descended from the same lineage as the first modern humans to migrate from Africa. My source for this was www.dailystormer.DNA, proof of racial differences, more facts to come to light. That's my second source for this information. These two new studies published in the Journal of Nature reveal that people of European descent today retain Neanderthal DNA that affects their hair, skin, fertility, predisposition to certain diseases. Albinism is described as syndrome resulting from very drastic changes in genes that disable the production of skin melanin. People with ostentatious albinism, transparent skin, and vision effects more serious in people with OCA1 mutations than OCA2 mutations. I'm going to stop here for a second. The OCA1 mutation occurs within Neanderthals. That's the OCA1 gene is responsible for the blonde hair that you see or the gray hair that you see, which is a lack of melanin protein in a specific within the Neanderthals or the white race. The OCA2 gene is what is in the African, when you have, of course, the Aborigines, with some of them, or just in general, Australians who are born with blondish hair. That's the OCA2 deficiency. I'm going on. And the OCA2 is a mutation. The OCA2 mutations. Albinism occurs in any ethnic group on every continent. The light skin of Europeans, even with those of blue eyes and very pale skin, are not considered to be suffering from that condition. The current evidence shows that Europeans have transparent skin not due to albinism, but because of genetic variants that are results of the Neanderthal DNA. A few gene variants, most in two genes, and I'm just going to read this out to you, SLC24A5 and SLC45A2. One of the most common gene variants is another synonymous single nucleotide variant, polymorphism, SNP number RS. The RS, I'm going to read this out again, RS1426654/SNPEDIA. And the RS, for people who are, that teach about the rhesus monkey, this was the variant that occurred within the Neanderthal DNA, the RS. It starts again with the RS1426654/SNPEDIA, meaning a nucleotide change. And again, the next one, of course, goes down again to the same thing, but it's a different number. Different form of numbers is RS1426654, which is what people call the rhesus monkey. This is the RS gene within Neanderthals. This is what they're talking about. in the third exon of the SLC24A5 gene accounts for transparent skin in Europeans. There are 3 other SNPs in that gene in Europeans. This gene is a number of the potassium-dependent sodium-calcium exchanger family and encodes on intercellular membrane protein. The protein is found to the trans-Golgi network in the melanocytes. So when you look at the deficiency of Europeans, of whites or Neanderthals, which is reality, whites are really Neanderthals. There's no such thing as a white race. You understand? There's such a thing as a Neanderthal race, and that's what whites are. Melanin, the deficiency that they have, the RS deficiency or the rhesus deficiency or the melanin deficiency that they have a deficiency in every other part of their body, from their organs to the outside of epidermis of the skin, the different layers from the melanocytes to the melanosomes that also exist in their hair, the melanocytes, melanosomes in their hair. That's why their hair manifests itself in a very flank or dead nature. It's a very oily compound in their hair. That's what the Neanderthal trait is. And that is responsible for the different lice problems that whites have or Neanderthals have, the dirt that they carry, the many amounts of dandruff that they carry in their hair. Their hair does not give off a certain nutrient that protects their hair from the compound of dirt. So they are naturally animalistic individuals. So when you're dealing with an animal that is a Neanderthal or the white race, you are dealing with a group of people who are naturally to be what they are. The thing is, blacks do not study nature. You think you study nature because you're studying Orishas or studying gods of Kemet, and you're really not, because you're not taking in exactly what it's saying to you. You're studying it from a European mind, from a skeptical perspective. So you're not really taking on what your ancestors taught you in terms of nature. You're teaching it from a standpoint of, this is what it is, and that's what it is. And that's not it. If you really studied nature, you would know that the natural process of the European and the way they respond and the way they react to things is a nature of them. Their animalistic nature in terms of what they eat, how they respond to black people, because you're dealing with the pineal gland. The pineal gland is also responsible for regulating emotions. When a person's pineal gland is deficient or non-existent, they have tendencies to go off the handle and to also react irrationally to certain things consistently. See, when you deal with the white race, as you can see, just from Trump getting in office, you're seeing whites lose their minds because the white liberal devil, that is Hillary, didn't get in, so they didn't get what they wanted, so then they're losing their minds, and so now they're bratting out. This is a natural process. Whites are not getting what they want, so they will act out on the black race. And because blacks do not study nature of people, they think that they can either pray this away or they can just get out of the way. And you can't get out of the way of an animal trying to come at you directly. That's not going to work. But the purpose of this is to differentiate the genetic differences between the African, which is us, and the Neanderthal, which is the white race, as well as the Asians, because we are not like them. We become like them when we mix with them. And we have to be able to understand this. We have to be able to take heed to this because we can't keep playing this game with our information. Because also, it's funny, we teach this out of Africa, Ice Age thing. We also teach it as if whites are light-skinned Africans. And I'm like, whites never came out of Africa. They're in Africa now as Afrikaners, but they never came out of they were not born in Africa and left and went into Europe. Remember, the first inhabitants of most of Europe were the Khoisan. It was 70% of Europe. The only part that they did not conquer or inhabit or control was the Eurasians, which after a while, based upon your culture, it ended up becoming the Elbrus, or the Caspian, between the Caspian and the Black Sea, which is known as the Caucasus Mountains. Whites are natural animalistic cave dwellers. They create these big, huge structures that we call buildings to live inside of. And we now live inside these situations. We have to be able to get out of the mind of being like Europeans, because eventually they're going to have to go back in the caves where they belong. You understand? They can't even stay out in the sun too long without having to go back in cold climates. And this is not, I'm not saying this in terms of to agree with the Ice Age theory, but the reality is they cannot stay in the sun for too long. This is a genetic deficiency in them. That's why they have to create different ways to mimic African people, from butt injections, butt implants, tanning salons, lip injections, to become like you. Then when you point it out, they pretend and act oblivious. This is what the game of deception that they play. This is natural for them to do these type of things. And so that's the thing. You have one of our sisters, one of our master teachers, Dr. Welsing, the great elder, talks about the nature of whites and their jealousy of the black race, and they're acting out their jealousy and their animalistic nature by killing off black people, and black people standing around looking confused because, again, when you do not study nature, you don't understand how to combat and deal with an animal trying to mate and mix and also trying to kill you off on the planet. All these things are very necessary, because if you're not studying the nature of something, you will always think that you can bargain with it, you can reason with it, you can talk to it, you can integrate with it, and then you find out that didn't work. So before I go back into the room and we talk, that's the reality, is that we have to, I just want to hammer this home, is that we have to study nature, the nature of the people that we are around and we are forced to inhabit. You understand? So we got to know who's who on the planet Earth. My father wrote a book called Who's Who on the Planet Earth back in the 70s when we were Muslims. And he was breaking down the same science. The same science has been out for 40 or 50 years. This whole Ice Age thing, which if people want to go with that, that's their business. But there's no DNA evidence to prove otherwise. But the Neanderthal Genome Project is DNA evidence to show who's who. To show, again, before I go back into the room, that the African has no Neanderthal DNA. But the Neanderthal, the white race, as well as the Asian race, are not fully human. And the only fully human person on the planet Earth is the African. So I'm going to go back into the room now for any questions or comments. Hopefully that cleared up a lot. For anyone who is still fuzzy about it, we'll be open to questions once I get into the room. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, brother, this is wow. You said a mouthful.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have a question right now. I'm gonna give it to someone else. But it's just a lot you said. I don't have a question right now.
Okay. No, that's no problem. I just wanted to also, before anyone else had a question, just wanted to say this. You had brothers such as Elijah Muhammad that taught that, grafted devil. He took the black gene, the black germ, and mixed and created, Yakub, the grafted devil. And you got to realize, when you got to put things in context. When people teach something, this is taught back in the 30s and 40s. So when our elders taught certain things, a lot of them taught based upon what they had around them. Only thing he really had was, what he learned from Master Farad. Master Farad was an Arab. And then you had the Bible. But there was no historical DNA to prove what he was teaching to people. So, you get something that's an ideology. It's part of an ideology. And because it's part of an ideology, a lot of times people are afraid to question it. Because Nation Islam is that group that you have like a sentimental connection to that. So we kind of don't touch it too much. We don't really want to let me not go that route. Let me not offend them, which is, I understand that. But my thing is, you have to use scientific method based on what you teach. And, people ask, why didn't you incorporate what's in your father's information? And the reason why is because, I read it that was connected DNA-wise to any white race. Now, there's stuff that, of course, that they're teaching now that is conflicting because there's not a DNA connection to that. And until further notice, until I get the DNA in terms of facts from DNA evidence, what is going to be remaining is what is DNA known, what is DNA found, because we have to use a scientific method to prove what we're saying as opposed to just saying, this is what it is because we say so. And I'm not saying that's what the Wapi Nation is doing, but at the end of the day, a lot of organizations are teaching many different origins of the white race, and then when you ask them, can you prove this genetically, they either get an attitude with you or they just don't want to talk about it, or they just throw whatever it is out there. And again, we're responsible for what we teach our children. And so if you're going to teach your children well, you have to give them what you can find genetically, because children are more advanced than they've ever been on this planet in this new cycle. And you have to be able to account for that. You cannot keep dumbing down children by just constantly giving them ideology. And I respect those who are on here who are Nawapian. I respect a great deal of what is taught from the Nawapian Nation. But as of right now, what I was reading, when I was trying to compare it, not so much from what my research was, but just to research it, I couldn't find anything in terms of DNA connection to anything, whether it be on the planet, because it was, a mixture of the Bigfoot information, and I was like, okay, I need to try to find some DNA evidence to connect this to, and I could not find that. So out of respect, I don't want to dive into something without the connection to the verification first. Because if we're going to say this is fact, I'm going to do my research first before I turn around and just bring it to the table and say, this is what this is. And even with the Neanderthal information, which turned out to be genetically proven, I did my research first. 10 to 15 websites. And the thing is, I'm not in the science room with them. So I can't, see what they did in May 2010. But that May 2010 scientific method proved and showed a differentiation between Africans, Asians, and Europeans. So that genetically disconnected any form of saying they were all the human race. When we're not all the human race. The only human race are Africans. Everybody else is Neanderthal, as has been genetically proven. Mm-hmm. So does anyone have any questions or comments?
I have a question. This is a fee. I just want to make a comment. My mind went in so many directions when you made that statement about buildings. That I don't know why, for some reason I was stuck on thinking about that. I was trying to think if we had any ancient structures that resembled buildings, like stacked on top of stacked living quarters, and it also made me think about seasonal affect disorder. Because we're not used to the cold temperatures and the lack of sunlight because we're tropical people, and that depression hits us a lot harder than it hits white people, particularly because, they're genetically accustomed to that type of weather and those type of situations. Unfortunately, we have the lowest SES in this country, and the majority of our people do live in apartment buildings or these, building complexes, so we don't have, all of this natural sunlight and these more windows and these more opportunities to get the warmth and the sunlight that you would if you were in a detached building, like a home, instead of being in an apartment building. But anyway, it was just a thought I had. But the question that I wanted to ask, and I think I asked you this before, and maybe you can elaborate on it. But with the African being the only true human and everyone else being mankind, which I think a lot of people fight on. There's a difference between human and mankind, but I'm wondering, some research that I was reading from Dr. James Small, where he said mankind is not only deficient in melanin and those type of physiological and biological features, but also void of a soul. That was something that they also that did a part that was not a part of mutation. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
Me, in terms of whites and blacks and differentiation with soul?
I think simply is, do you think they have soul?
No. Because if you're looking at what soul is, in terms of soul is a biorhythm. Soul defines biorhythm within us as a people. When you look at whites, keep saying white, it's crazy. When you look at Neanderthals, they lack body and biorhythm. Body rhythm, is conducive to, let's say, how you walk, in terms of like dance, in terms of your movements, your fluency. Biorhythm is deals with frequency. And the thing is that when you're dealing with them, they're really thrown off in terms of frequency, in terms of their connection to a higher source, connection to ancient ones. What ancient ones would they be connected to? Slave masters, cave dwellers. So when you're dealing with soul, you got to realize that we as African people, we are naturally solar people. When you look inside of us, or when you deal with us as in terms of genetic people, genetic structure within what we call the solar plex is the inner sun within us as African people. When you're dealing with Neanderthals, you're dealing with those that are lunar people. And when they became modern, this is part of also the process of this class, is that the modern European or Neanderthal was 6,000 years ago. And that was the upgrade from just the Neanderthal, because remember, Neanderthals are extremely sterile groups. And whites became a little more, how should I put this, a little more fertile after a mixture with the contact with the Africans who migrated into the Eurasians, where it was occupied only by Neanderthals, and that sped up their evolution 6,000 years ago, but that was a moon cycle. So when you deal with lunar people, let me know if this is confusing, you're dealing with Neanderthals, you're dealing with modern Europeans, and they lack soul. And because of a lack of soul, it's a lack of, how do I put this again? It's a lack of being able to walk on a fluent level, being able to, it's like, for example, melanin is what gives you everything that you need on the planet. And when you deal with soul, you're dealing with an individual that on the next realm, because we talk about chakras so much, the chakra system, which is energy circuits within self, that is also connected to the biorhythm of an individual. You understand? That deals with the frequency of an individual. When you deal with Europeans, they don't even have that capability at all. That's why they know that they have to mix in with us in order to extract that melanin so that they can get part of the helix of the melanin so they can try to make a connection to some other form of a source. But when you deal with Neanderthals on just their own genetic level, they lack that source. They lack the energy circuits within self that comes from having a soul. Whereas with us, remember, we're the first with those with the science of the chakras and the 9 principles and all this. Because the further you go into African spirituality, there's even further there's further circuits and chakras in just 9 or 7 or even 16. The further you go in, you're finding more and more and more and more different circuits within self. I mean, you have, a mental plane, a soul, an oversoul, all these different things that is connected within the African, but they know that they don't have these capabilities, so they know that they have to mix in with us in order to get this capability. That's the other part of teaching this about whites, is that they know that they don't have this type of capability, so the best thing for them to do is to mix in with us in order to adapt to certain type of genetic differences that we have between us. So when you ask about the soul, that's a very important question, because everyone has a spirit, of course. Everyone has a spirit, but everyone does not have a soul. And that's very important to know, because you see the spiritual difference, or you see the essence difference. That's why they say when you say the soul is the essence of the African. But the spirit is something that is a shell. It's the casing of the soul. And see, when people don't want to deal with cosmology and metaphysics, because you can't put that to a test of a science. You can't go through these things, but you can deal with reasoning, and you can look at Neanderthals and see that there is a genetic variation in terms of what they're lacking, because it's everything within them is a problem. They know when they die, there's an evaporation process. Right. They don't go anywhere. This is important to know. This is not something that we teach to put nobody down, but this is reality. This is true. So I could care less what anyone thinks about what's being said right now. But realize when they die, there's an evaporation process for them. When we die, it's all based upon our connection to our biorhythm and our frequency within self, and our connection and our purpose being fulfilled by our ancestors that we're here to reincarnate as. But with them, there is no next level process, because there's no essence of them. They are what they are, animalistic by nature. So hopefully I answered that question. Does that answer your question?
It does answer my question. It absolutely does. So I understand the biorhythm part. I think what I was expecting, I was totally not expecting that, so you gave me a whole other area to do research on. I was more expecting some kind of explanation about why Neanderthals are so violent and can act in such an inhumane manner toward other people on the planet. Because it's like they make everyone else feel so bad about, natural acts of violence or, a war or this type of thing, but they have been the most traumatizing and murderous people on the planet. So I always thought that the only reason why they were capable of that level of inhumanity was because of a lack of soul. But the biorhythm part gave me just a whole new aspect, a whole new perspective on that topic that I can research on. So I appreciate it.
You do the information. No, that's no problem. You do the research on the pineal gland. Then it literally is. I remember when I did the interview with Atum Ra, we talked about this, that the first step of melanin is the universe. When you look outside in triple darkness, that's melanin. When you go into the cell, when you go into the African, the beginning of melanin is the pineal gland. Everything secretes from the pineal gland. from into your organs. As a just to say, as a man, first before I get into the woman, it goes from the brain, which is what? Neuromelanin. Neuromelanin is responsible for thoughts, your intelligence, your being able to control and level out and balance your emotions, because human beings or Africans are emotional. But the problem is, dealing with white supremacy, we've become over-emotional. We've become basically people who live off of fear, which has been implanted based upon the social system. But when you are regulated and in your right state of mind, everything is regulated, and that's in the neuromelanin. That's why if you notice, if you take Africans and you put them in the right conditions and not put them in conditions that we've been dealing with in the wilderness of North America, dealing with ghettos and hoods and stuff, then you get geniuses. It's like you, just like, for example, you could take one of our people out of the hood and you put them in the right environment and they become geniuses. And you see, I see our brother, our elder, as you mentioned, Professor Smalls, if you look on his page on Facebook, he actually shares us a lot. A lot of our Africans that are in America, I'm talking about us here born in America, those that are put in the right environment and they get put in the right church and the right schools, that they're able to flourish correctly and not be in prison camps the way our schools are. But I'm just saying in terms of the neuromelanin first. But the pineal gland secretes the melanin into your vital organs and into your ability levels from the sperm. And that's what, because there's melanin, because a lot of people don't even know that there's melanin in sperm. And the melanin in sperm shows and gives potency and the amount of potency that is needed in order to have a certain amount of fertility in the African male. It's the same thing with the woman. And then going to the ovaries, there's a certain amount of melanin within the ovaries that allows her to be as fertile as she is. But that's like we're going into what you're talking about in terms of the animalistic nature of white people, in terms of the Neanderthal. You're dealing with someone while he and she was in caves, they were mating with, when they got tired of just mating with their sisters and brothers, they began to eat them. And Michael Bradley, the white man who wrote the book, The Iceman's Inheritance, this is one piece that I took from that book, is what they were doing to each other while in the caves. They didn't have any food, so guess what? They ate their women, they ate their sons, they ate their daughters. You got to realize, I'm going to make this comparison now. For the Khoisan, who was inhabiting caves, they were only using the caves in terms of as a stele for their art. They didn't live inside the caves, but they used the caves as literally like a pyramid text for their medium in terms of pyramid art that still is there to this day in parts of Paris and in parts of France. And if you want to look that up, just to give you a reference, look up Khoisan pyramid art in Europe. And it gives you all this, but I'm just giving you this as a comparison between the Neanderthal and the Khoisan Africans, that they both inhabited Europe, but both used their situations totally different. The Neanderthal, when he and she was in the cave, they ate each other. When you're dealing with the Khoisan, when they inhabited Europe, they just used the caves as a median, and they used the rest of Europe when it was in a fertile grassland, before it literally become majority caves. They used that situation for a hunting and gathering process. So that literally gives you an idea of the different genetic differences between Africans and Europeans or Eurasians. So all that this is extremely necessary to know, is why is this person acting the way that they're acting right now? You got to realize blacks have to understand. I don't want to keep going. I don't want to, do this, but this is just to make a point. Black people think that at some point whites are going to come to them and come to the table and negotiate some end to the black genocide in America, the public hangings that we see. And you can't think like that when you're not looking at things from a reasoning perspective. You can't think like that. What that means is that we're not taking in nature. You can't study nature, but then not study the process of different animals in nature. You can't look at things and realize or try to convince yourself that at some point this individual is going to accept you in their society, because you can't expect that from an individual that can't even be accepted by the sun on a planet. Just think about that. This individual can't stand the sun. If you're supposed to be on the planet Earth, why does the sun attack you? You're the only thing on the planet that cannot stand the sun. The sun, which is a ball of energy, hydrogen and helium, gives energy to everything under it. Why is it that it doesn't give you energy but it kills you if you're supposed to be here? I mean, that's common. This is just we call it non-mind radio, non-reason. Let's put things together on a logical perspective here. If this individual is supposed to be here, why do you have to go and get? And I'll keep repeating myself. Go to suntan lotions, get these injections, get all these different artificial creations. If you're supposed to be on the planet with me and you, this isn't old information. We see this every single day. You see skin peeling off, limbs deteriorating. I'm talking about white people. I'm talking about white people. To this day, this is still the same process that they're going on or still going on to this day. This is reality. It's time to start dealing with reality and stop trying to create different perspectives or perceptions based on most of our civil rights movement mindsets that we refuse to let go of. I'm sorry. I hope I answered that question, elaborated the best way I could.
Hello? Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, brother.
So I want. What about albinism? Like in Africa, you have albinism there. Can you elaborate on that?
Mm-hmm.
Because some will say often people say that that shows the which it doesn't really, but they will say, some people say that shows, you have Caucasian in your genealogy, but that wouldn't be the case. But can you elaborate on that?
Okay. Yeah, you look at let's say the African albino, because you got blacks that have albino in America. All an albino is really is a lack of skin melanin. That's all it is. Because an albino, let's say me and a woman come together and I have a child, and that child comes out albino. That child within their body is still, let's say for example, their organs. They could have a child, and the child can come out and look like me. All it is just a lack of skin melanin. It's just, for example, that's why within my notes I made a distinction between OCA1 and OCA2 gene. The OCA2 gene is a variant mutation that happens within our people every once in a while. When you look in the OCA1 gene is when it's in the Neanderthal. It's a natural process. It's not even a mutation. It's a natural process. But the OCA2 gene, which is responsible for the blondish hair that we see in a albino in black people. It's the same thing when you look at the Aboriginals of Australia. They had what was called the OCA2 gene, but reality is they migrated out of Africa and into Australia first. But when you look at the OCA2 gene, I want people to do research on this as well. This is the gene that's within black people that when you have albinism, that occurs because OCA2 is actually a process. It's really a component of albinism. And OCA2, that component of albinism, the process that gives the blondish or yellowish hair in the African albino. So it happens. It's not like black. Of course, you see albinos in blacks as well in America and as well as in Africa. But in terms of the different genetic difference of the OCA1 or OCA2, I just want to reiterate this again, is that there's a totally genetic difference. So OCA1 is the Neanderthal. OCA2 in terms of when you talk albinos, that is within the albino, and that's the process of albinism. So hopefully does that answer your question just a little bit?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thanks.
Okay. And it's very important. I think also what we got to do as well is look up you also have Africans that also have a process of the reddish hair that occurs too. Not just the yellow, but the reddish hair too. You have Africans that have gray eyes, blue eyes, green eyes, but these different eye mutations are results of a different components of albinism that occurs. It happens. It's a mutation that happens at times depending on the weakness of the gene, but that itself is still a separation between the Neanderthal and the African. Doesn't mean that you come from them or they come from you. There is no genetic difference, because again, we can go into Africa now and still see the same albinism process, but there's no such thing as a white albino. No such thing as an Asian. No, you don't see too many Asian albinos like that, but you see a lot in certain ones in certain tribes. You still see African albinos, whether it be in Africa or in America, and also in Europe as well. But that's just also, I'm glad the brother asked the question, because that's to hammer it home the genetic difference between the African, who is a human race, and the Neanderthal, or the white, which is the Neanderthal race, or the European, or the cave dweller. Because you do with Asians as well, they were also cave dwellers as well. They're not exempt from this argument or exempt just from this statement. Does anyone have any more questions or statements too? All right. Well, if there is no questions, no statements, I will wrap it up. And what I'll do, I have three other classes I'll be putting up on my YouTube page, but I'll be making sure I put this up really soon between now and Friday. So I want to say thank you for everyone that was able to get on and build with me, and I want to say Hotel Wild Shug, peace and black power.